All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a real genetic detective story. We're going to follow the trail of clues hidden deep inside our own DNA to see if we can solve one of the world's most common and, frankly, most misunderstood neurological disorders.
If you've ever had a migraine or know someone who has, you know it's not just a bad headache, it's something else entirely. It's this debilitating condition that can literally put your whole life on pause.
So let's get right into it. What is this migraine mystery all about? Well, the central question is pretty simple, but the answer, well, that's incredibly complex. Why do some people get these awful attacks while others don't? And look, we're not talking about a minor inconvenience here. These attacks can knock you out for hours, sometimes even days. We're talking nausea, vomiting, and extreme sensitivity to light and sound. It can completely sideline you. This brings us to the big question that's driving all this research. For something so common, it's surprisingly hard to predict who will get them. Scientists have suspected for a long time that our genetics play a huge role, and now they're finally on the trail to see where those genetic clues lead. So, okay, every good detective story needs a prime suspect, right? Well, in this case, researchers have zeroed in on one particular gene that's in charge of a really important chemical messenger in our brains. First up, let's meet serotonin. You've probably heard of it. It's a key chemical messenger that helps regulate things like mood, sleep, and, you guessed it, pain processing. For years, scientists have had their eye on serotonin, thinking it's a major player in how migraines get started. And that brings us to our prime suspect, a gene called SLC6A4. You can think of it as the serotonin transporter, or maybe a gatekeeper. Its entire job is to manage serotonin levels by recycling it, pulling it back into nerve cells after it's done its job. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This gene basically comes in two different flavors, or alleles. There's a short version and a long version, and they do opposite things. The short S allele is less efficient at cleaning up serotonin, which means you end up with higher levels of it hanging around in your brain. The long L allele is more efficient, so it leads to lower levels. The big question for our investigation is, does having one or the other make you more likely to get migraines?
To figure that out, we've got to look at the evidence. And our first stop is a local investigation, a classic case control study that was done in the Jammu region of North India.
So what they did was pretty straightforward, but really effective. They got a group of 250 people who suffer from migraines and another group of 250 healthy people, and they just compared their DNA. They were looking for any key differences in that serotonin transporter gene between the two groups.
And bingo! At first, it looked like they had a major breakthrough. The initial data showed that people with two copies of that short allele had a 2.6 times higher risk of getting a specific kind of migraine, one called migraine with aura. This was huge.
But here's the twist in our story. In science, you always have to double-check your work. Be extra sure your findings aren't just a fluke. So when the researchers applied a much stricter statistical filter, poof, the link vanished. It wasn't statistically significant anymore. It felt like the investigation had hit a dead end.
So, was the case closed? Was that the end of it? Not even close. It just meant our detectives needed to zoom out, get more evidence, and look at the bigger picture. The investigation went global.
To get a really solid, powerful verdict, they did something called a meta-analysis. They basically took their own study and combined it with 15 other similar studies from all over the world. Suddenly, they weren't just looking at a few hundred people. They were looking at a massive global data set, which gives you a lot more power to spot the real patterns.
And when you put all of that global data together, look at this. A really clear pattern finally starts to emerge. You can see that having one short allele bumps up the risk a little bit, but having two copies, that SS genotype, that's where you see a real statistically significant connection. So, the final verdict was in. When you look at all the evidence combined, having two copies of that short, less efficient version of the gene increases your odds of developing migraines by a solid 27%. Okay, so after all of that genetic sleuthing, what's the bottom line? What does this all actually mean for understanding and maybe one day treating migraines? Well, first, and this is super important, this gene is a risk factor, not a destiny thing. It's just one piece of a much larger genetic puzzle. And what's really fascinating is how this finding kind of flips an older theory on its head. For a long time, some theories pointed to low serotonin as the problem. This evidence actually suggests a link to higher active serotonin levels. Ultimately, it proves that our genes don't act alone. They're part of a much bigger story.
Which leaves us with this one last huge question. If our genes can load the gun, creating a predisposition for migraines, then what exactly pulls the trigger? Unlocking that complex dance between our DNA and our environment, things like stress, our diet, our sleep patterns, that is the next great mystery, and it's the future of migraine research.